Here's Mark.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hate to keep saying it, but I never signed up for, Ed McMahon's announcement. I appreciate it, but don't feel like you have to do that every
Hey,
Sunday.
we love you. It's been going on for years.
Okay, well, I don't want to break your tradition.
Well,
A
started.
couple things. Joe, I didn't know you could have a little eye surgery. Anybody want to sign up for a little eye surgery? Raise your hand.
Not quite the same as
I'm
a.
like you, I hate it when you have an eyelash, that gets in your eye and then you can't wait to get it out. So, I did have laser eye surgery years ago. That was a good thing.
Yeah.
And then also, for the men's prayer breakfast, the every other Wednesday, so next Sunday will be the coming Wednesday that we would have the breakfast, right?
Yes.
I get so confused. It's like, why not just have it every week? I'd show up and they wouldn't even be there. Every other week, not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. I guess you need to put it on your phone if you're smart enough to do that. I don't use my phone as a calendar. My wife gets mad at me for that. All right, open up your Bibles if you will. We are getting ready to close out shortly Nehemiah. We're going to be tackling Nehemiah 11 and Nehemiah 12 this morning. And then we will conclude next week with Nehemiah 13. And then from there we're going to venture off and we're going to dive into the Gospel of Luke, Dr. Luke. So, I kind of titled this lesson, Celebrate Good Times Come On. If you all know Kool and the Gang, from back in 1980, that was a great song. The 80s and the 70s had some great music. Obviously, most of our age groups. So with that being said, we're looking at the chapter 11, and it talks about here, the first verse it says, Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, but the rest of the people cast lots to bring, I better put my glasses on, bring out one of the 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 tenths remain in the other cities. So if you remember where we're at today, we're at the point now, chapter 11 is basically for repopulation. I want to go into that in a little bit more detail here in just a minute. And then chapter 12 will be a dedication. We've already come from the standpoint of the wall being demolished in 586 BC by the Babylonians. And then we went into captivity, which was prophesied by Jeremiah for 70 years. And they get out, and they get by Darius and King Darius and King Cyrus are allowed to go back to their hometown, which they do in about 538 BC. Good morning, Mrs. Smith. How are you?
I'm sorry.
And at 538 BC, they were allowed to go back and move back into their homeland. And their homeland, of course, was in disrepair. It was demolished for the most part back in 586, right? The final burning of Jerusalem at that point in time. And so we've got the city that was, Zerubbabel came back, and he helped build the temple. That was the first thing they wanted to do. They wanted to set up the worship. You got to worship. That's why they were in Babylon. When they were in Babylon, they couldn't worship. They couldn't worship freely. God wanted them to worship freely from the very beginning. We're going to get to that here shortly. But the fact is, here goes Zerubbabel. He feels inclined. He leads them back with Ezra. They built back the temple so they could have worship. So they've got someplace to go. But then, of course, Nehemiah gets word that, from his brother that the walls are still decimated. They're still down. We're still in danger. So he goes and he builds the walls back, right? And they build the walls back, and there was all kinds of opposition by Tobiah and who else? Sanballat. And there was Jezreel. There was the three that was kind of the culprits that was trying to derail the construction or the reconstruction of the wall. That didn't work out. They built the wall with all that opposition. How many days? 52. They got it in 52 days. You're right. So now the walls are up and around. And they already had like a little celebration. When they built the walls, they were happy. We had that little party thing. We passed out the Hershey's Kisses. They had a little bit of a celebration, but this is going to be a dedication. It's like when you build the church sanctuary. You know, everybody's all up and excited. You know, you finally got it enclosed. You know, you take off your skating rink shoes and you come in here and you can actually sit down and there's not ice underneath your feet. And the sanctuary's pretty. And look how it's morphed to today. I mean, it's been totally redone. The stage has been totally redone. The lighting's been totally redone. I mean, when you look at it from walking inside, it looks like it's a marvelous place to come and worship. And we're being told here that we're supposed to bring our tithes and offerings to the temple. And for what reason? So that we can honor God. And some people say that's kind of a reflection when you look at your church, and not necessarily that it has to be made out of gold, so on and so forth, because then you're not, people perceive that as you're hoarding things and not giving it to the poor, okay? We already discussed this before. Jesus says the poor is always going to be among you. But how are you going to worship? You're going to worship Him fully. So when we go back here, we're talking about the rebuilding of the wall, and let's go here to this. Now, I don't know if you all can see this very well or not. Hopefully you can. I'm going to get my little pencil off here. I like this. This is the walls of the Jebusite. If you remember, back in the Old Testament, the Jebusites are the ones who lived in Jerusalem. They owned the land. If you remember, God said to Moses, He says, I'm going to give you land that you didn't cultivate. I'm going to give you vineyards that you didn't prune. I'm going to give you cities that you didn't build. I'm going to give you territories that you didn't have. And He told Joshua and He told Moses, every soul your foot steps on, I'm going to give you this land, right? So this is part of the land. He says, I'm going to give you this land. This is the land where Abraham, when he came through, and he was going to sacrifice Isaac at Mount Moriah. This is the property. This is what we're talking about. And God's already said, I'm going to give it to you. But it hadn't happened yet. Abraham's way back here, right? David's way over here. So we have the Jebusites here. They own the territory. And here comes, this is probably about a 12-acre site that you can see here that's kind of encircled. That's the original walls of what was around Jerusalem. And then we have, back here, about 1000 BC, we got the walls according to David's time. Well, wait a minute. Let's look at that. That's the walls of the Jebusites. There's the walls of David's time. It really didn't change, did it? When David took over, he came in and he took over and they beat up the Jebusites. If you remember, the Jebusites said, hey, even the lame and the blind, they're going to be able to defeat you. You can't come in and take over our land. We're fortified. Didn't work out that way. Not so fast is what David said. We came in, we conquered, we took over. We got your little city. And that's what happened. That was the lame and the blind. That was in 2 Samuel. And God gave them this land. So this was what was prophesied all the way, like I say, back through Abraham. That's going back to Genesis 12 and Genesis 15 and 17. And then we move a little bit forward here to Solomon's time. Oh, we've got to change. Let's look again. There's the Gilhon Springs. You see that down there in the lower portion, right here of the city. Now, right there is the current Temple Mount. This is like an overview, right, of seeing the city of Jerusalem. So you folks have had the privilege of seeing it. You folks have had the privilege of seeing it. And you can kind of see that it appears that, like here, is the existing walls. There's been a lot of changes going over the years. You know, when we get over there and we see this outer wall, we're thinking, oh, this thing's been here since Abraham's time, you know? It hasn't been here since Abraham's time. It wasn't here since David's time. Here's David down here, right there. This is where David was. So then we move a little bit forward to Solomon. That's Solomon's time. Now let's go back just a second. Here we are down here in the bottom. See the bottom? And then we're going to go over here to Solomon's time. And what did he do? He expanded it and he went around the temple area because that's where he went to. David was able to build it, this platform of Mount Moriah, the fleshy floor of Arana, which was purchased, remember, by David. And he wasn't allowed to build it because he was a man with blood on his hands. And Solomon comes in and he expands the wall. He moves it up north. He surrounds it. This was about 957 BC. And then we have another change in the wall. Oh my goodness. We go from that skinny little thing to it morphs out on the bottom on the left-hand side going to the east. And this is done in Hezekiah's time. This is about 700 BC when the Assyrians that were headed up by Sennacherib, who was the commander of the army, who was going to come down and he was going to just demolish the Jews in Jerusalem. And Hezekiah prayed, you know, God, we can't fight these guys. They're too big. It's kind of like the grasshopper thing when they were trying to go in the promised land. You know, Lord, what are we going to do? He covers himself with ashes and he expands the wall, trying to get some protection because the population had grown. The population had grown between Solomon's time, and so consequently part of them had moved over to this direction. And that's another reason why that Hezekiah moved the wall over that direction to try to keep these people safe, because they were going to be coming under attack by the Assyrians. And this wall that was built in Hezekiah's time was 25 feet wide, 25 foot tall, and it measured 2.5 miles long. That's a long track. You know, Joe, you're a runner, or, you know, used to be yesterday. And when you did, you know, you could run this track, and if you did this, you know, 3.1 miles would be a 5K, right?
Right.
So this is just a little bit short of running a 5K. That's a nice little run. And that's what Nehemiah, or what Hezekiah had built. And this thing, if you can see down here, we have the pool of Siloam. If you go back to this figure here, you're right there, and it's down there at the bottom. And now we got the pool of Siloam, and we have Hezekiah's tunnel. Hezekiah's tunnel is magnificent. Did you all get to go through Hezekiah's tunnel? Oh gosh, you got to go back. That's worth the flight itself. Hezekiah's tunnel is about 583 yards long, and it winds and it twists. And they started up here at the upper point, right there at the Gilhon Springs, and it comes down there to the Pool of Siloam, and you can see how it snakes, right? You're walking through these little cavern tunnels going, you know, about, sometimes it's about this wide, and sometimes you might have to turn just a little bit to get through it. It could be anywhere from 6 foot tall, it could be to 8 or 9 feet tall. There's a couple spaces you have to bend down just a little bit to get through it. There's a little bit of running water that goes down through it. And from the start of it, here, and they started here, and they met in the middle. Amazing. This thing's like 30-some feet down below the ground, 60 feet in some areas. The difference between here, A, if I will, and B, was 12 inches. 12 inches. They didn't have any cranes, they didn't have any walker lifts or anything like that. And this is a marvel that is beyond anybody to explain. I can't explain it, but it's awesome. So anyway, we have the expanded walls down here, and of course, the reason that Hezekiah built this around here, around the Gilhon Springs, was because when the Assyrians came down from the north, when they came this direction, if the Assyrians could cut off the water supply, you're going to eventually die. You know, you can't live forever without food and water. So they can just sit out there and just wait on you to give up and not lose any of their fighting members. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to sit out there and fight, or just stay out there and not fight. So, of course, when this happened, if you remember, oh yeah, that's the best part. They came down to attack, right? The Syrians came down to attack. Nehemiah, or Hezekiah was like, we can't fight these guys. We don't know what to do. They wake up the next morning, what do they find?
Dead soldiers.
185,000 dead soldiers. The angel of the Lord took care of them. And of course, the angel of the Lord has taken care of them the whole way. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of cloud of the fire by night. You know, the angel's been there the whole time trying to take care of us. And then we move here from Hezekiah's time to our time that we're talking about today, the walls of Nehemiah. Now note here that this portion over here is gone. Because when they went back to rebuild, there wasn't anybody there to rebuild for. There was just a few squatters that was there on the property, right? So they went back and they found the original outline areas of the wall, and they went through there and they incorporated it. And of course, you can see there that they still have Hezekiah's tunnel and the Pool of Siloam is still there in place. And God helped them obviously to get this accomplished. And we know now that we're in about 444 BC. We started out in Solomon's time, and all the way back, when David projected going into there. So we're from 1000 BC, we're in the 444 BC, and there's still remnants of these blocks or rocks that are there, right? Mm-hmm. So then we go forward just one more time, the Hasmonean time. These Hasmoneans followed up about 164 BC, and these were led by the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. When they were being persecuted, they rebuilt the wall. They expanded the wall. They took it back. They went back over here where the X was, and they even expanded it up here in the north. There we go. So, and you can see the expansion there, and it still included Hezekiah's tunnel and the Pool of Siloam. So we have, again, another overview here of the Hasmonean period. This was 164 BC. And then, what we're more concerned with, what did it look like in Jesus' time? Well, this is what it looked like in Jesus' time. You can see the expansion right over here to the north, or the west, where we have Herod's Palace. It changes a little bit, if I can get my, it's not going to do that. There we go. Right here was the expansion where Herod's Palace was in the Hasmonean time. And then we go back over here, and the northern portion is about the same in Christ's time. So when Christ came, this is what it looked like. The Temple Mount was still here, and our gates would have been here. The Eastern Gate, which is the gate that Jesus is supposed to come back through, the beautiful gate, however you want to phrase it. This would have been established by King Herod in about 19 BC. King Herod started this renovation project. A pagan follower of a god, not the god. King Herod is the one who says, hey, I'm going to expand this Temple Mount right here. I want to incorporate it, make it larger than it was before. And in Ezra's time, when Zerubbabel and Ezra came back and they rebuilt the temple, it wasn't anything like what Solomon had, because they didn't have all those resources, and they didn't have as many people. And now King Herod, this guy that's under Rome, the governor, if you will, says, I'm going to expand it because I want these people to pay taxes. I want them to follow me. I want to be the guy over in this part of the territory, and I answer to Caesar. King Herod does. So King Herod was a big builder. He built this walls. Now this area here is about 37 acres. Right here. Like I told you before, it's probably, if you were to sell it, would be the most expensive property in the world. Because you got the Christians, you got the Jews, you got the Armenians, you got the Muslims. All of them laying claim that that's their homeland. That's a lot of people with a lot of money. So that would be, in my opinion, would be the most expensive property in the whole world, because everybody would desire that if it was for sale. It's not for sale, because God owns it. And eventually, we're going to find out that this temple that's here now is going to get changed. We're not going to see it, because we're going to be listening for the trumpet call. So, after Christ's time, what happened? We go over here to the next king, Agrippa the first. And he changes it. Look at that format change. We go from here, we go to here. And Agrippa expanded it a little bit more. We went up further north. We went all the way around this area here that we didn't have before. There we go. Because you can see how he's expanded it here. And he comes down. This is Agrippa's time frame. This is about 44 AD. What happens in 44 AD? We get a little battle that starts cropping up between Rome and the Jews. In 66 AD and 70 AD, it comes to a climax. And they come and they destroy it, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, they destroyed these walls that have been there since 1000 BC. And then we go to the city walls that we see today. This is what we see when we get to go to Jerusalem. You get to see this. Well, look here. Remember this? The city of David's down this way. It's not in the walls. It's not included. Not only was that not included, you can see the Gilhon Springs and the Pool of Siloam. It's not included either. It's just, if you've gone to Jerusalem, you probably have been to those sites, at least the Pool of Siloam, because that's like one of the major stopping points that's on every tour. And it's outside of the city walls. Well, what happened? In the 16th century, Suleiman, he was the Magnificent, decided he was going to rebuild the walls on the walls that was already there and expand it and keep it fortified on the north. And of course, up here by the Temple Mount, where the eastern gate is, the beautiful gate is, Suleiman was not a follower of Christ. He didn't believe in the Messiah. To the point that he put 16 feet of concrete in that gate. So the Messiah can't come back through that gate, because it was prophesied that the Messiah, who left for the Mount of Olives over here, as he ascended in front of his disciples, and the angel said, "What are you all waiting on? He's ascending up into heaven. He's going to descend just as he ascended." So when Jesus comes back down, he's going to come back down to this Mount of Olives over here, and that mountain's going to split in two all the way down, and he's going to walk back into the temple. But Suleiman thought, if I build this 16-foot wall, he won't be able to get back in the temple. So it's still there. It's still shut up today. But you and I know that 16-foot wall is nothing, right? That ain't going to happen. All right, so let's get back to where we're at. Nehemiah's wall. There is some remnants of Nehemiah's wall that you can see if you go there today. We didn't get an opportunity to see that. I don't know if you all did when you were there before. But it kind of looks like this. That's kind of the remnants of Nehemiah's wall. And they have been able to trace this back through archaeology, whatever it is, back there, so that they could determine where it was the age of it. So they know that this is the portion that was left over from Hezekiah's wall. So we've gone through the Jebusites, from David to Solomon to Hezekiah to Nehemiah, the Hasmoneans, from Christ to Agrippa, and to today's city walls. And you can see what's left there, which is pretty awesome. So now we have, they've fortified the walls in Nehemiah's time. It's like the Field of Dreams. Anybody watch that Field of Dreams movie? You go out into the cornfield, and what's the saying? Build it, and they will come. Same thing we're going to run into here. They build it, and now they're wanting them here. They want them to come. They want them to repopulate. In the Old Testament, Christ said, if you, or Jesus. Let me go back. In the Old Testament, God said, God the Father said that if you don't obey me, I'm going to scatter you. Right? He scattered them. 722 BC, everybody up in the northern kingdom got scattered all over the place. Remember, we only had the two tribes down here. Who were these two tribes? Who? Judah and Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin were the two tribes that were left down in the southern kingdom, called Judah, right? They didn't call him Benjamin. I don't know why they didn't call him Benjamin. I have a little theory, but that theory doesn't matter. Here's an interesting thing. When they were traveling through the wilderness, and they had all those 12 tribes, I think I might have showed you all this picture before. Showed it to you again. They had these 12 tribes that surrounded the temple, right? The tabernacle, right here, the tent. And over here we have Judah. Now, if you'll notice, Judah is the largest tribe. Right. And so Judah was the first one to depart when they left. Every time they packed up the tent and they left, Judah's group, 74,600, was designated as Judah's tribe. And then look over here at Benjamin. Benjamin's tribe, they're over here on the west side. They had 35,400. And then we know also in the book of Judges, we had a little problem with the Levite's concubine. The Levite was taking his concubine through, and he was traveling through, and he stopped at the city, right, in a Benjamite city. And the Benjamites came out, and they raped his concubine all night long and left her. And he comes out the next day, and she's like on a doorstep. I don't know how you leave your concubine on the doorstep overnight, like you let your dog out to use the bathroom and you don't check on it. But the concubine went out, and when he came back and checked her, she was like evidently unconscious or dead. It doesn't say in Scripture she was dead. He puts her on his horse, leaves that city, goes back home, what you do?
That's right.
Slice and dices her, right? Cuts her into 12 pieces. War it. It's beyond my explanation of why you do that. Cut her into 12 pieces, send her out to the 12 tribes. And what's the 11 tribes come to the Benjamites and say, hey, what in the world are you guys doing? You can't do that. And the Benjamites were like, don't tell us what to do. We're who we are. We're mighty warriors. The Benjamites were mighty warriors. They were fighters. A lot of them were left-handed dudes. Yep. They were good with the sword. And so they said, we're not going to turn them in. They said, we need to know who did this. And the Benjamites said, we're not going to turn in our fellow Benjamites. And they said, if you don't turn them in, then we're going to just attack you. They said, go for it. And they did. And they attacked the Benjamites. They lost the first time, but they kept fighting until they basically dwindled them down to 600 Benjamites were left. 600 Benjamites. And then they said, well, what are we going to do? We just ruined one of our 12 promises that God said was going to be there in the promised land. We've almost taken them out of history. And so the Benjamites end up being allowed to go to Jaresh Berera, and they got 400 women from there. And that's how they reestablished their numbers. And with that 600, there's 200 left, right? But then they went down to Shiloh and got 200 more. And that's how they repopulated themselves. So when we got now, leaving here, going into the promised land, going back into Jerusalem, we had 50,000 roughly. Remember what left Babylon and went back into the promised land? About 50,000 people end up going back there. We don't know how many of them were Judah's people and how many of them were Benjamites. We just know that they were those two tribes were the tribes that came back and repopulated the area. So we're finding out here that the leaders of the people who lived in Jerusalem and the rest of the people cast lots to bring out 1 out of 10 to live there. Why did they not want to live in Jerusalem? We had just built the wall. Why don't you want to live there? Well, what were these people? You know, they were farmers. They were sheep herders. They grew crops. You know, in the city, when we're back here in the city, you know, it's not like you got a whole lot of ground there that you're going to farm, but out in the outlying areas, and these cities that went all the way down to Hebron, okay, which was about 15 miles south of Jerusalem, David's first city, they had farmland, you know. You had acreage. You had, I don't know how many acres you had that you could farm, and it was yours. So when an invading army would come in, they probably don't care about your 1,000 sheep over here on this hillside. When this city over here is encased in a wall, what's inside that city? Well, we know well, let me tell you what's inside that city. Let's go here just a little bit further along. 1 out of 10. They cast lots. Remember? It's not gambling, although people perceive it as gambling. They cast lots. 1 out of 10 came into the city. So 9/10 of the people lived out of the city. 90% of the people lived out of the city. And some of them said, hey, I'll just go into the city. And what's it say? It says, and all people, and the people blessed all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. So those people were like elevated, like, yeah, come on into the city. Who wants to live in downtown Huntington? Anybody? I don't. I'm not living where I'm at. At least I don't think I am. I don't want to. I want to be out where I'm out. And it says, and all of the heads of provinces lived in Jerusalem. That would be like saying, if you lived in the outside of the city limits, and you don't like the way that things are going on in the city of Huntington, and you want to run for mayor so that you can change things and put our city in the right direction, and guess what? You can't. And why can't you? Because you don't live in the city limits. You don't have that investment.
Right.
These people here, the leaders, had the investment in that territory. They lived there. They were the ones who was going to take care of the things. So look over here, go to verse 6. And the sons of Perez, who lived in Jerusalem, were 468 able men. Remember Perez? We talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
He's out of the line. He's out of the bloodline, right? Here he is. He's living in here. And let's go down to verse 14. And their brothers were valiant warriors. Those were the Benjamites, because they were the valiant warriors. They lived there. Go down to 16. We had the Levites, who were in charge of the outside work of the house of God. And then we had another group of people that were there. These are all group of peoples from all the way from verses 4 all the way through the end of the chapter of 36. And it's basically the same thing we're going to run to in chapter 12 all the way through 26, 1 through 26. These are the names of the people that they're acknowledging. So in 17, these people were praying and giving thanksgiving and prayer. 19, we had gatekeepers, and those people who watched the gate, and they numbered them as 172 people. So when you moved into this city, the city didn't operate by itself. The city had to have help. And to operate the city, you had to have workers. They had at least 300 people that supposedly guarded the temple grounds. Why? Where did the people bring their tithes and their offering? To the temple. They had the money. They had the gold. They had the silver. It was Fort Knox. They had to protect it. That's why they had so many people there. They had all these other ancillary people that had to work. You had the people that were guarding the gates. You had the people that was going around checking on the walls. You had the people that was helping with the street, just like a regular city. You had to incorporate it. You had to get more people to come in, and that was the whole aim of chapter 11, was to try to repopulate the city, to get more people into the city. And then they come over here to 25. It says, and for the villages and their fields, and again, this went all the way down to Hebron, 15 miles away. They were asking 1 out of 10 people to leave your area and come in and repopulate it. And that's how the city of Jerusalem finally started getting repopulated. And again, back in chapter 12, it talks about the priests and the Levites who came over with Zerubbabel, and it itemizes them name by name all the way down to verse 26. And then in verse 27, we have this. Now, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out the Levites from their places to bring them to Jerusalem with gladness, with hymns, with thanksgiving, with song, and accompaniment of cymbals, harps, and lyres. They were having a party. They were doing Cool in the Gang. They were having a celebration, good time. Come on. That's what they were looking for. They were finally getting to the point that they were able to have this big celebration. And then you had a little bit of a separation, because we have the Temple Mounts here, and they started down in the southern area here, and we had Ezra taking a group of people, basically half of the population, and then we had Nehemiah taking half of the population, and they left and they went this direction. And I got to get to my notes here to tell you where I was at, because I've kind of journeyed a little bit ahead. I forget the notes. That's like when you're supposed to. That's like when you're the class president, you know, and you got this big speech, and you come up here and you sit down. I saw this guy do it at Cabell Midland. He sat down there and he had these notes, and he said, "I'll forget the notes." And he threw them like this, and the teachers went, because they had to approve the script, right, that he was talking about, and then he winged it, and you could tell he was winging it too, kind of like I'm winging it right now. So anyway, we have where they started over here. Let's go to verse 39. And at the fountain gate, they went directly up the steps of the city of David by the stairway above the house of David to the water gate on the east. So we have Nehemiah taking half the group and going south, and Ezra was going north. And what they did was they marched all around, playing these cymbals, all these people on top of the wall, And they walked around this way, and they met here at the temple. Now, what did Tobiah say? Tobiah said, when you built this wall back, You know, if a fox jumps on this wall, what's it going to do? It's going to collapse. He was downgrading from the very beginning, right? You can't do this. You guys, you don't have the skill. You don't have any engineering background. How are you going to build this thing? Not only did they build it, and not only could a fox get on it, they had men, women, and children marching on it all the way around the walls until they met here at the temple. And then they had a big celebration, and they had sacrifices. And that's what we do. We celebrate every Sunday. What do we celebrate every Sunday? Every Sunday is a what?
Sabbath.
It's a Sabbath. And why is it the Sabbath? It's what?
To rest.
It's the Sabbath because what do we celebrate on the Sabbath?
To rest.
Christ's resurrection from the tomb. He rose again from the tomb on the Sabbath. That's what we celebrate for. And we do that every Sunday. And everybody that was involved here in the rebuilding of the walls, all these names that I'm not even going to attempt to try to tackle, and you're welcome to, that's listed in both, all these chapters, basically now we're in 11 and 12, there's tons of names here. We had 84 names in the last chapter. Now we got a bunch more names that's listed here. Why? Because they're important. You know why they're important? It's because like this. Somebody comes here real early in the morning, I'm not going to say any names, and they get this stuff over here in the corner, and they start making coffee. Every Sunday. I mean, if I come here early, it's like he and his wife normally are the first ones here making coffee. Why? Because they feel that's evidently it's part of their mission for us. Part of their gift back to the class. We got people that bring donuts. Sinful sugar stuff. It's not manna. And we eat it. And it feels good. It tastes good.
It's mandatory.
You don't even have to chew it. All you got to do is suck it and it goes all the way down. And we have people who bring donuts. We got people who prepare for announcements in the morning. We got people who come up and teach, me and other people. And you all have done it. Everybody that has prepared for it. Why? Because we want to come and we want to do something awesome in corporate worship. And that's what they were doing right here. They were having corporate worship. They were worshiping in the confines of the temple grounds. We worship in the confines of our building. We call it the church, but it's not the church. The church is every one of these people that are sitting in these seats. That's the church. They just happen to come and meet at this building, right? And then we move over from here, from our Sunday school class, and we go out here, and we got people that's in charge of the audio, the visual. We got greeters out front at the door. We got people that guard the door for somebody that comes in like that happened in a stupid situation down in Texas to try to make sure that it doesn't happen here. You know, we have quote-unquote guards, if you will. And then we have people that's preparing for playing the piano and the praise team. You got people doing announcements. You got Trent doing the pastoring, the preaching of the word, and you know, on and on and on. It takes a collective group to make things happen. It took a collective group of the Benjamites and the people from Judah to make this thing happen, to start back what God had initiated from the very beginning. And the whole thing started because of their demise. Their demise was just not following them in the first place. They were the chosen people. Salvation comes from the Jews first, and then to the Greek. It's through them. This whole Bible is written by Jews, except for one person. And we're going to talk about him next week. They're all written by Jews. 65 books of the 66 books is written from a Jew. Written by a Jew. And a lot of times it's written for a Jew. But we're going to find out, you know, it's all inclusive, just like our class here, like everybody participates, like in church, everybody participates. It's all inclusive. God doesn't love the bone cutters any more than he loves the Napiers. He doesn't love the Napiers anymore, he loves the Smiths. You know, I'm sorry. I hate to break that news to you, but he loves us all the same. He died for every one of us. His love is unconditional. Unconditional. Regardless what you do, or regardless what anybody does to him, he still loves them. He created them, right? He created man from the dust of the ground. He breathed air into his nostrils. And man became a living soul. And when we die, what's it say is going to happen to us?
Gonna
We're going
return
to return to the
dust.
dust. So some people say, like, you know, when you die, you're like, and I used to be this way. I'm not this way anymore. When you die, you know, when I went to my grandfather's funeral, it's probably one of the earlier funerals that I went to, and because that was one of the first ones that I witnessed. And they had the casket there, and my in-laws had Tri-State Casket Company. Of course, they weren't my in-laws back then. I just knew about caskets. And I thought, you know, wow, how awesome would it be to be buried in this nice wooden, beautiful casket, you know. Just, I love old antiques, so old wood looks awesome anyway. So, be buried in this nice old wooden casket, and I thought, you know, it's going to decay and stuff like that. Maybe you don't want a wooden casket, maybe you want one of these new ones that are like aluminum or steel or something like that. And of course, then they bury you in a vault inside the casket, so you got like double protection. But the Bible says you're going to return to dust. And then some people say, well, I'm just going to get cremated. You know, put my body in a urn, throw my ashes so-and-so. And then somebody's like, well, how can you do that? That's not scriptural. Because scripture says that you're going to have a new body. God's going to raise your body up to dead in Christ. And 1 Thessalonians 4, the dead in Christ are going to rise first. So how are you going to rise if you're ashes? Well, I'll tell you how you're going to rise when you're ashes. You're going to rise when you're ashes like you're going to rise when you were dust. I'm being cremated. That's just what I want. You know, I don't care. I don't care about the. If you want your funeral with the casket, yeah, that's awesome. You know, I don't care about it. You know, I want to be ashes anyway. If God can make me from ashes from the very beginning, I'm pretty sure He can recreate me from ashes after everything's said and done. So if you have that fear in your mind, wipe it out. It ain't going to be an issue. So let's go to this. Why do we have all this stuff? And this is our world today. In our world today, there's about 8 billion people. What is your mission? 8 billion people. Well, we heard part of the mission. It was right here in chapter 12. Part of the mission was they came together and they gave sacrifices. They gave sacrifices because they gave their gifts and their talents to the temple. They rebuilt Jerusalem. They were repopulating Jerusalem. And the whole point was for what? Worship. And they're getting ready for the Messiah. They know the Messiah is coming. The problem is we got a 400+ year gap between Nehemiah and Matthew. The Old Testament and the New Testament, we got a 400-year span. We're like, nothing's happening. Well, we don't think anything's happening, but there's things always happening because God's always in control. God is an organized God. We don't have a disorganized God. We don't have a God like Baal. Remember Elijah? Yeah. When Elijah was on Mount Carmel, and Elijah said to Baal's prophets, they said, why don't you come down, or have your God come down and singe this cow that we cut into, this sacrifice, with fire from heaven. Call up there and get him. And what did he do? He says, maybe your God's asleep. Maybe your God's on vacation. Maybe your God just stepped away from the podium. Maybe your God's not even there. Yell louder. Our God's always there. We don't have to yell any louder for our God. Our God's always there. And it was there for them at the temple when they were doing their sacrifices and giving their tithes and their offerings to rebuild it for the ultimate purpose of the preparation for the Messiah to come, which he did come years later. 400 years later, they waited. And if you remember the disciples, even back in Jesus' time, step forward a little bit, in Jesus' time, when Jesus ascended into heaven, they were like, first off, before he ascended into heaven, it's like, hey, can I be on your right-hand side of the throne? You know, they thought it was going to be a takeover right there and then. And then when he ascended up into heaven, they thought it was going to be in their lifetime. Well, that was 33 AD, people. We're at 2024. We're 2,000 years later. That's a long time. 1,000 years is like one day to God, right? That's 2 days. 2 days. So we got 8 billion people in the world. How many people are Christian? Are supposed to be Christian? 2.38. 19%, roughly, of the population of our world claim to be Christian. So what are we doing? What are you doing when you're shopping? What are you doing when you go to the gas station? What are you doing when you go on vacation? What should you be doing? You should be witnessing.
Ash Wednesday was a wonderful time for Joanna and I. We went to a restaurant after the service, and we had the ashes on our forehead. And the guy behind the counter says, "What's that on your forehead?" And it's just a wonderful way to tell them about Jesus.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not suggesting you put a cross on your forehead when you walk around, but and I'm guilty as anybody else. Is what you say, what comes out of your mouth is heard by other people, and your actions are seen by other people. So if you are like the James and John, real boisterous, sons of thunder, beware, because people are watching. But we're imperfect. We're never going to be perfect. We are supposed to be holy because God is holy. That's our standard that we're supposed to